They didn't respect your desire. They fed on it. Because the moment you show hunger, you become prey. Machiavelli warned, "He who reveals his desires becomes predictable, and predictable men are easy to control." You thought chasing her made you bold, but all it made you was exposed, not powerful, possessed. You thought desire made you magnetic. You thought showing her how much you wanted her would stir something inside her. Respect, affection, maybe even love. But lust isn't seductive when it's exposed. It's pathetic. It's predictable. And what's predictable is easy to control. You didn't walk in with power. You walked in with hunger, and hunger is the fastest way to lose the upper hand. Machiavelli understood this better than most. Power doesn't belong to the loud, the needy, the emotionally exposed. It belongs to the man who controls perception, the man who reveals nothing, who never lets his pulse betray him. You think you're expressing yourself, but what you're really doing is broadcasting your weakness. Every compliment, every double text, every attempt to impress, she reads it. She stores it. She uses it. Not because she's cruel, but because you gave her the manual on how to bend you. Desire, when unrestrained, becomes a confession. It tells her everything she needs to know. Where you're desperate, what you're afraid to lose, and just how far you'll go to keep her around. And once she knows that, she doesn't have to move, she just has to wait. Because now, you'll do the work. You'll chase. You'll adjust. You'll self-edit. And the worst part? You'll call it connection. But Machiavelli would call it something else. Submission. You're not leading. You're reacting. You're not powerful. You're predictable. Because while you think you're being romantic, spontaneous, vulnerable, all she sees is a man ruled by his urges, a man who has no mystery, no edge, no self-possession, a man who's easy to move because he's already moved by her presence. They didn't fall for your desire, they fed on it. And when they're done, they discard it, because what's easily given is rarely valued, and what's obvious is never feared. That's the truth you were never taught. Lust isn't power, it's exposure. It gives her the map. It writes her the script. It hands her the strings and begs her to pull them. You thought chasing her proved your strength, but every step closer just proved you had no control. And when a man has no control, he doesn't get love. He gets used. Some women don't need to seduce. They don't need to try. They just need to notice. Notice the way you look at them a little too long. Notice the subtle hesitation in your voice when they smile. Notice the way your energy changes the second they enter the room. That's all they need, because once they know you want them, they don't need to move. You will. This is the quiet economy of power, and Machiavelli understood it centuries ago. He wrote, "A wise prince must never be hated or despised, only feared or desired on his own terms." Most men don't live on their own terms. They live on hers. Her schedule, her replies, her temperature, and they call it romance. But it's not romance. It's dependence. It's self-erasure, disguised as devotion. Desire flips the power. The more you show it, the less she has to. The more you pursue, the more she retreats. And every step back she takes increases your hunger. Not because she's cruel, but because you gave her the steering wheel. She disappears to amplify your need. She goes quiet so your mind gets louder. She becomes distant, and you call it mystery. But it's not mystery. It's manipulation through absence. And it works, because you're chasing a ghost. Not her, but the emotional hit she gave you when she first mirrored your fantasy back to you. You were hooked the moment she reflected what you've always craved. Affection, validation, softness. And now, you'll do anything to get it back. This is where control is born. Not through force, but through psychological gravity. You orbit her. She doesn't move, and yet your world rotates around her silence. She didn't reject you. She ruled you, silently, because you made her your center. And the moment you do that, she becomes untouchable. Not because she's rare, not because she's perfect, but because your hunger makes her sacred. That's the trap. You keep thinking if you say the right thing, show the right effort, offer the right protection, she'll return the energy. But energy was never the currency. Leverage was. And the second she knew you were starving for her, she had it. Not out of malice, out of instinct. Because power, when it's handed over, will always be used. You don't need to become colder. You need to become conscious, because once you see the game, you stop being played by it. And when you stop giving your hunger away, you stop being moved by women who only learn to control men who don't know how to control themselves. They're used to being chased. Most men don't think. They react. Smile at him. He folds. Touch his arm. He follows. Disappear for a day. He panics. It's a pattern, and they've seen it 100 times. So when you don't chase, something breaks. Not out loud. Not in words, but somewhere deep in the unconscious. Doubt creeps in. Why isn't he reaching out? Why hasn't he tried harder? Did I do something wrong? Suddenly, the frame shifts, because you're not doing what every other man does, and that makes you dangerous. Your silence doesn't read as disinterest. It reads as power, because it forces her to feel something she can't immediately control. Uncertainty. Jung understood this better than anyone. The unconscious is not rational. It's emotional, primal, reactive. And when you withhold your energy, your attention, your pursuit, you don't just create space, you create tension. Not external tension, internal. She starts to wonder, to project, to invent reasons for your distance. She begins doing what you've always done, chasing a mirror. That's not manipulation, that's discipline. And Machiavelli would call it governing perception. He'd say, the appearance of control is often more powerful than control itself. Your restraint isn't passivity, it's pressure. Every text you don't send, every compliment you don't offer, every urge you override, it builds weight, and that weight pulls her, not toward your words, but toward your gravity. Because when a man can feel lust and not act on it, when he can feel desire and not kneel to it, he emits something rare, presence, not desperation, not approval-seeking energy, just stillness. She feels it, and it confuses her, because now you're not a man orbiting her. You're a man holding center, and that energy rewires her nervous system. It disrupts her pattern. It stirs her unconscious. You didn't chase. You became the question. And questions demand answers. She might lean in. She might test. She might pull harder to regain control, but she won't forget how it felt. To want the reaction and not get it. To expect the script and be handed silence. That's when you stop being one of many and become the one she studies. Because your restraint didn't starve her of attention. It starved her of control. And in its place, you fed something deeper. Presence, unshaken, unmoved, unfolding at your pace, not hers. And that's what creates respect. In war, the first to fall is the one whose next move is obvious. In power, the first to be used is the one whose desire is loud. And in love, the first to be discarded is the man she can read like a script. Machiavelli didn't preach morality. He preached control. And control is impossible when you're predictable. Predictability is death in strategy, in seduction, in survival. And nothing makes a man more predictable than lust. It's the easiest impulse to manipulate, the most obvious to detect, the fastest way to know exactly how far you'll bend. She doesn't need to ask what you want. She sees it. In your eyes, in your responses, in the way your mood shifts the second she leans in. She doesn't need to test your mind. Your biology already answers. That's why lust isn't dangerous. It's pathetic, because it strips you of ambiguity. And once a man loses ambiguity, he loses power. Mystery is threat. Uncertainty is leverage. But the moment you salivate, you surrender both. She can study you. She can pace you. She can predict every word before it leaves your mouth. Because now you're not a man. You're a forecast. You didn't scare her. You satisfied her curiosity. And once a woman's curiosity is satisfied, she disconnects, because there's nothing left to explore. But a man who withholds his lust, he confuses the unconscious. He becomes fog, hard to grasp, impossible to map. And that fog becomes gravity, because now she doesn't know how much control she has. She doesn't know what you're feeling. She doesn't even know if you see her the same way other men do. And that confusion, it's not weakness, it's power. Because in that space, where she can't predict you, she starts reacting. She tries harder. She leans in. She mirrors. Not because she's in love, but because she's off balance. and people chase balance. You weren't rude. You weren't distant. You were just centered, and that centeredness made you unreadable. Unreadable men are unforgettable because they never gave away the one thing most men can't hold: impulse. You think denying lust makes you cold, but it doesn't. It makes you untouchable, because now you're not begging to be chosen. You're choosing who's even worth watching. That's how Machiavellian seduction works. Not through flattery, through disruption. You don't win by giving her what she expects. You win by forcing her to question what she assumed. And the moment you want her, the second it shows on your face, in your energy, in your words, you cease being a threat because you've just proven that she still controls the battlefield. Her tests aren't verbal, they're not questions. They don't come with warning signs or rules, they're energetic. A glance, a pause before replying, a slight delay in affection, a dress that hugs just enough, a joke that edges close to disrespect. Every moment calibrated, not consciously, but instinctively, to one thing: gauge your center. She doesn't need to ask what you feel. She watches how you shift. Do you lean in when she pulls back? Do you over-explain when she gets quiet? Do your eyes betray you the moment she reveals skin or silence? This isn't cruelty, it's feedback. Because women don't just want attention, they want to feel the weight of a man who doesn't flinch. And most don't carry that weight. Most men fold at the first sign of withdrawal, at the first cold text, at the first flirt with another guy, at the first hit of rejection. They start adjusting, softening, performing, not because they're unattractive, but because they're reactive. And reaction kills presence. You weren't rejected. You were measured and found easy. She wanted to see where your edge was, how quickly you'd crumble, what part of you was still ruled by approval. And you showed her, not through failure, but through predictability. Because every move you made said one thing: I need you to see me. And the second you need to be seen, you've already lost your shape. That's the secret behind her silence, her teasing, her inconsistency. She's not confused. She's watching to see if your desire will move you, if your hunger will betray you, if your masculinity is centered or borrowed. This is why some men collapse without ever being hurt. They weren't destroyed by love, they were dismantled by small tests they didn't even recognize. Because every test was just her energy asking, do you lead your emotions or do they lead you? And when she finds out you don't, she doesn't even need to walk away. Her energy disconnects, and you feel it. Suddenly, you're trying harder, reaching more, bleeding value. Not to win her, but to prove you weren't as weak as you just showed. But it's too late, because now she knows that your strength was a front, knows that your restraint was performative, knows that you're not grounded, just rehearsed. The only way out of this? Stop performing, start observing, hold your energy, let her test, and stay still. Because when she feels your silence hold, when she sees that her games don't move you, that's when she begins to respect what she can't manipulate, a man with nothing to prove. The man who controls his lust controls his life, not because he's celibate, not because he's a monk, but because he understands one thing: lust is a tool, not a compass. And when you treat it like a compass, when you let it lead, it drives you into chaos, into obsession, into women who mirror your emptiness back to you. But when you tame it, when you stand in front of beauty, temptation, arousal, and choose presence over reaction, that's when you stop being ruled and start ruling. Machiavelli never said to kill emotion. He said to own it, to use it like a blade, only when it serves the strategy. Same with lust. You don't suppress it, you transmute it. You take that raw, chaotic hunger and you channel it into discipline, into silence, into stillness, and that stillness becomes gravity. Most men spill their energy the second they feel it. A glance from a woman and they start fantasizing. She smiles, and their mind leaves their body. She pulls away, and their nervous system collapses because they've never practiced dominion. Dominion over breath, over desire, over projection. They think the answer is to not feel, but feeling isn't the enemy. Unconscious reaction is. Your lust doesn't need expression. It needs transformation. It needs to be forged into something that doesn't beg to be seen, but commands to be felt. That's what real restraint looks like. Not tight, clenched control, but relaxed ownership. It's when you can lock eyes with a beautiful woman, feel the pull, and stay completely still inside. Not numb, alive, but you're not leaking energy. You're holding it. You're storing it. And she feels it. She doesn't feel your words. She feels your center, because eye contact, when held from presence, becomes dominance, not forceful, energetic, not aggressive, unshakable. And silence, it becomes power, because most men speak to close the gap. You speak to widen it, to let her feel the weight of not knowing what you think, to let her sit in the tension of her own curiosity. That tension becomes pressure, and pressure pulls. That's why distance matters, not as punishment, but as calibration. When you remove yourself, physically or energetically, you force her to confront your absence, and if you've been leaking need, she'll feel relief. But if you've been radiating presence, she'll feel withdrawal. Not from comfort, but from masculine gravity. Women orbit those who possess themselves, not those who perform confidence, not those who act cold, but those who don't break character for validation. Because here's what no one told you. Your energy is sacred, and when you stop spilling it into fantasy, into premature pursuit, into emotional chaos, it starts building pressure inside you. That pressure turns into vision, into clarity, into magnetism. You start walking differently. You speak slower. You listen deeper. You're not chasing women. You're moving through life with the energy they're drawn to without knowing why. Because now, you're not ruled by hunger. You've become the source of it. That's what makes you powerful. Not because you don't feel lust, but because you no longer serve it. It serves you. So when the moment comes, when you're tempted, tested, pulled, you don't flinch. You observe, and you choose. Because your masculinity is no longer reaction. It's rule. She was never the reward. You were. But no one ever taught you that, because they wanted you chasing, performing, proving. You were conditioned to believe love was something you earned, that women were the prize, that your value came from how much you could give, impress, or sacrifice. But Machiavelli would have laughed, because the men who chase, they get used. The men who orbit, they get drained. The real power never belonged to the man who pursues. It belongs to the man who's willing to withdraw, not out of spite, not as a trick, but because he knows one thing. Selection is strength. The strongest men aren't celibate. They're selective. They don't need approval. They don't need attention. They don't even need sex. They choose it when it aligns with their standard, because they know their time, energy, and presence is rare, and they move like it. That's what breaks the frame. You stop auditioning for her attention, and you start evaluating her access. You're not hoping to be chosen. You're observing if she's even worth disrupting your peace. That alone changes everything. Because women are used to being chased. They're used to men proving. They're used to being pedestalized before they've shown any depth. But when you don't chase, when you don't flinch at beauty, when you don't mistake chemistry for compatibility, she doesn't know what to do with that. And that confusion turns into curiosity. That curiosity becomes fascination. That fascination becomes pull. Because now she's not trying to figure out if you want her, she's trying to figure out why you don't need her. That's the shift. That's when you stop being one of many and become the standard. Because the man who doesn't need only chooses, and his presence becomes rare. Not because he's unavailable, but because he values alignment over attention. She respects the man who walks away without looking back. Not because he's cold, but because he's clear. Clear on who he is. Clear on what he offers. Clear on what he will never beg for again. And that clarity, that's what makes him unshakable. Because now, he's not hunting love, he's embodying power. And any woman who enters his world doesn't get to define him. She either matches that power or disappears in its presence. You told yourself you were starving. Starving for love. Starving for touch. Starving for her attention. But you weren't starving. You were undisciplined. You weren't in pain because she didn't choose you. You were in pain because you never chose yourself first. This was never about her. It was about the part of you that never learned how to sit in desire without letting it control you. You thought her approval would fill the hole. You thought if she came closer, you'd finally feel worthy. But it was never about closeness. It was about command, self-command, emotional discipline, the inner stillness that says, I feel this, but I'm not moved by it. You kept mistaking lust for hunger. But lust isn't hunger. It's a test of your edge, a test of your clarity, a test of how easily you'll fold when faced with beauty, validation, and the fantasy of being seen. And you folded, not because you were weak, but because you were still asleep to your patterns. Every time she pulled away and you chased, every time she tested and you reacted, every time you lost yourself to win her back, you weren't losing to her. You were losing to yourself, because the real enemy was never her. The real enemy was the part of you that believed your power lived in her response. But power doesn't come from being desired. It comes from direction, from knowing where you're going, from holding your emotional line no matter who walks into the room, from leading your energy like a king, not a beggar. And the moment you stop living for her gaze, the moment you stop needing her attention to feel seen, that's the moment you become unavailable to everything that once broke you. Because now, you're not performing, you're present, you're not trying to be enough. You already are. She doesn't validate you, she observes you. And in that observation, she feels the weight of something she can't control. A man who owns himself. That's all she ever wanted to feel, and all you ever avoided becoming. So let's close the loop. It wasn't about her body. It wasn't about her words. It wasn't even about the heartbreak. It was about your inability to hold yourself. And the moment you start doing that, the moment you redirect all the energy you've spilled trying to be chosen, you remember who you were before the performance began. You don't need her attention. You need your own focus back, your mission, your direction, your silence, your edge. Because when that comes back online, you stop craving rescue. You become the one who never needed to be saved. Lust was never the enemy. The absence of inner leadership was. And now you lead. With presence, with boundaries, with energy so solid that nothing outside of you gets to decide your value again. Final line, you were never weak. You were just unconscious. And now, you see. And once you see, you never go back.